Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. And now for part two of the 6 greatest female rock singers of all time. If you missed the first video, you can click here and watch part 1 of the video. Well, who's number 3? Well, she was born in 1939. She was born in Brownsville, Tennessee, and had the given name Anna Mae Bullock. This is none other than the great Tina Turner. Like many great singers, Tina sang in the church choir. At the age of 11, her mother left an abusive relationship and her father moved to Detroit. Tina and her sisters lived with the maternal grandmother. However, when Tina was 16, her grandmother passed away and Tina and her sisters were sent to St. Louis to live with her mother. Tina and her sisters would go out to the nightclubs in East St. Louis, especially to the Manhattan Club. At the Manhattan Club, Tina got to see Ike and his band, the Kings of Rhythm. Tina asked Ike to perform many times, however, he refused. However, one evening in 1957, during an intermission break, the drummer gave Tina the microphone and she belted out a B.B. King blues number, "You Know I Love You." Ike heard this and immediately made Tina the featured vocalist of his Kings of Rhythm. In 1958, Tina recorded her first single called Box Top. She was known there as Little Ann. Ike wrote a song entitled A Fool in Love for the artist Art Lassiter. However, when they were ready to record the song, Art didn't show. So they went ahead and recorded a demo with Tina doing the lead vocals. They thought later on Art would come in and fill in the vocals. However, a DJ got to listen to the demo tape and he passed it along to a local record executive. The record executive convinced Ike to make her the star of the show. At this point, Ike picked her name. He picked Tina because it rhymed with Sheena, Sheena the Jungle. That was her stage presence. And he took his last name, Turner, and then he patented that name. So Anna Mae Bullock, aka Little Ann, is now Tina Turner. The group known as Ike and the Tina Turner Revue, they toured incessantly and they were one of the best R&B revues out there. In fact, they rivaled the James Brown Revue. They later signed with Warner Brothers Records and their live album, which was released, climbed to number 8 on the R&B charts. The shows put on by Ike and Tina Turner were noticed by Phil Spector, and Phil Spector spoke to the manager of Ike and Tina Turner, who was Bob Krasnow, and he wanted the creative rights. Once he got this, he set out into the studio with Ike and Tina, and they recorded, at the time, the most expensive song recorded and what Phil Spector considered one of his greatest works. Although it did not do well on the US charts, this album only reached number 88 on the Billboard charts. However, it did very well in the UK, reaching number 3, and it was the number 1 album of all places in Spain. I don't know how that happened, but it was in Spain, number 1 for Ike and Tina Turner, River Deep Mountain High. Interestingly, Rolling Stone considered River Deep Mountain High as the 33rd top song on the 500 greatest rock and roll songs. Additionally, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame placed this song as well as in their 500 most important rock and roll songs. They went on to record the CCR song Proud Mary, which became their largest selling single. It reached number 4 on the charts and it sold 1 million copies. And in 1971, this song won the Grammy Award, the best R&B performance by a duo or group. Other career highlights was in 1974, she released her first solo album. She was nominated for the best R&B vocal performance by a female. She also starred in the film Tommy, where she played the Acid Queen. In 1976, on the way to a gig in Dallas, Texas, Ike and Tina got into a physical altercation. Tina filed for divorce, and in 1978, the divorce was finalized. After this time, Tina basically performed as a novelty act. She signed with Capitol in 1983 and recorded several singles, including the Al Green single, Let's Get Together, and this single did quite well for her. After the success of her singles, Capitol decided to release a studio album, and in 1984, the album Private Dancer came out. This became a huge hit for Tina. It hit number 3 on the charts, and this album sold 10 million copies. This is by far her most successful album. In 1984, the song What's Love Got to Do With It hit number 1, and it is her only number 1 hit. That year, she won 3 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year for What's Love Got to Do With It. In 1986, her 6th studio album, Break Every Rule, sold 5 million copies. The single from that album, Back Where You Started, also garnered a Grammy Award. In 1988, Tina's live album in Europe garnered her another Grammy Award for the Best Female Rock Vocal Performance. Her legacy is quite lengthy. She did a lot of things. First of all, she was the first female, as well as the first black singer to appear on the cover of Rolling Stone back in 1967. She has won 12 Grammy Awards, and 4 of them for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance. She is the only female to have won Grammy Awards in both pop music, rock, as well as R&B. And the VH1 100 Greatest Women of Rock and Roll, she is ranked number 2. In 1991, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with her husband, Ike Turner. And in 2018, she got the Grammy for Lifetime Achievement Award. And finally, in 2021, she was the proud inductee into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Rolling Stone ranked her number 17 in the 100 Greatest Singers of All Time. Most importantly, she became a symbol of strength for women. She is known as the Queen of Rock and Roll. So who's number 2 on my list? Well, this is an American singer-songwriter. She was born in 1946, grew up in the Southwest in Arizona, and it is none other, surprise, surprise, Linda Ronstadt. Linda was influenced by her family life. There they sang a lot of Mexican folk songs, as her great-grandfather was married to a Mexican woman. She was also exposed to pop music on the radio, and her mother introduced her to Gilbert and Sullivan, and her father introduced her to the Great American Songbook. Linda spent 1 semester at Arizona State University, and then in 1964 went off to LA as she wanted to sing folk rock. In LA, she met up with her friend Bobby Kimmel, and he was at the time co-writing songs with Kenny Edwards. The 3 of them formed a group, and they were known as the Stone Ponies. They recorded 3 albums, and their first album had the hit single, Different Drum. This song was penned by Mike Nesmith. Yes, the Monkees' Mike Nesmith. He was a musician before joining the Monkees, and this song reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1967. In 1969, Linda released her first solo album, Hand Sewn, Homegrown. This album is considered the first alternative country album by a female. Linda toured incessantly throughout the United States in the late 60s and early 70s. She sang a lot of cover songs, and she tried to highlight a lot of lesser-known singer-songwriters. The touring was taking a toll on her both emotionally and professionally. She was one of the few women who was touring with male bands, and because of that, she was not looked upon very favorably or taken very seriously, and so she had to deal with a lot of male ego. Later on, with her touring, she had the backup band of Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Bernie Leadon, and Randy Meisner. Yes, the original founding members of the Eagle. They were her backup band. Linda was noted saying that she learned more about rock and roll singing from Maria Callas albums than she ever could from listening to pop albums every Sunday. Linda was having a tough time, not only on the road, but with her producers. Most of her producers became lovers, and then it was very difficult to have a professional career. On the advice of some friends, she decided to hire as producer Peter Asher. Now, Peter Asher took her singing very seriously, and their relationship was purely professional. With Peter Asher as her producer, in November of 1974, she released her 5th studio album, and this was the big one, the one that made her a national name, and it is Heart Like a Wheel. And talking for myself, this is my favorite Linda Ronstadt album. This album not only was #1 on the Billboard album charts, but was also a #1 album on the country charts. In 1977, Linda released the album Simple Dreams, and this album did quite well for her, and she had 2 hit singles on the album, Blue Bayou, which reached #3, and It's So Easy, which reached #5. This was actually the first time a female solo singer had 2 hit songs in the top 10 at the same time. In 1978, Linda released the album Living in the USA, and this is the first album by any artist to actually be shipped as a double platinum album. That is, 2 million albums were requested prior to its release. She became the highest paid woman in rock music, and in fact, in 1978, she made $12 million, which is translated in today's dollars as $44 million, and she sold enough albums for $60 million in sales, which today's dollars would be $220 million in sales, which is quite remarkable for the 1970s. This success allowed Linda to have some freedom and get to choose what she wanted to record, and she took advantage of this. She got her wish first by performing on Broadway, playing the role of Mabel in the Gilbert and Sullivan classic Pirates of Penzance. There she played opposite Rex Smith. She was nominated for a Tony for her performance in this role. Linda Ronstadt also sang a duet with Paul Simon on his blockbuster album Graceland. She sang in the song Under African Skies. Linda's actually part of the second verse lyric where it says, "Take this child, Lord, from Tucson, Arizona." One of her next projects was Trio, which she actually started in 1978. She became friends with Emmylou Harris backstage at a performance, who was introduced by Chris Hillman. Yes, Chris Hillman of the Byrds. And they got along great. However, the project in 78 was scrapped, and it wasn't until 1987 that the first Trio album appeared, and this was Linda with Emmylou Harris and Dolly Parton. The album Trio reached #1 on the country charts and was a top 10 album on the pop charts as well. In fact, during her career, Linda had 4 #1 country albums. Then in 1987, she released the album Canciones de mi Padre, which is songs of Mexican folk music, and this was also very successful, selling 2 million copies. Linda won a Grammy for this album for the Best Mexican American Performance. Finally, in 2011, Linda hung it up and called it quits, and she retired from the music business. Suffice it to say that part of her retirement had to do with her inability to sing. Linda developed a degenerative disorder and could no longer perform. Talking about her vocal range is from contralto to soprano. She was able to combine country music and Mexican folk songs into what she called Mexican bluegrass music. This is what gave Linda her unique pop and rock and roll sound. Her legacy is quite lengthy, and once you hear her legacy, you'll understand why I think she's the #2 greatest female rock and roll star of all time. She is the first touring female to sell out rock arenas. She was the top grossing female solo artist in the 1970s. She holds a record at the time for 8 consecutive platinum albums. Previous magazine called Cashbox called her the #1 singer of the 70s decade. Her album Heart Like a Wheel is ranked 164 in the 500 greatest albums of all time in the Rolling Stone magazine. Linda's first Latin release, Canciones de mi Padre, that we spoke about previously, is the largest selling non-English speaking album in American music history. She has won 11 Grammy Awards. She also won a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016. Linda had 3 #1 pop albums. She also had 10 top 10 pop albums. In the country charts, she had 4 #1 albums and 15 top 10 selling albums. Linda was also very much sought after as a backup singer. She appeared in over 120 albums. She is voted the top female singer of the 1970s. She's been on the cover of Rolling Stone 6 times and also appeared on the cover of Newsweek and Time magazine. She has sold over 100 million records during her lifetime, and she is also one of the main women to open the door for other rock and roll singers to come after her. Because of all of this, she is known as the First Lady of Rock. And now for #1, top of the pops. Who is she? Well, she was born in 1943 in Port Arthur, Texas. Yes, none other than the great, the legendary Janice Joplin. Janice hung out with outcasts when she was young, and she had a friend who had many blues albums which she listened to, and this influenced her to becoming a singer. She heard albums by Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey as well as Leadbelly. This all led her to the type of sound that she wanted to sing. In 1963, she left Texas because she wanted a change of scenery and went out to the happening place, which was San Francisco. Janice hitchhiked to San Francisco with a friend, Chet Helms. He would later play an important role in Janice's music career. In San Francisco from 1963 to 1965, Janice started experimenting and increasing her drug use as well as drinking quite heavily. She lost a ton of weight, and physically she was in poor condition. Her friends convinced her to go back to her home in Port Arthur, Texas, to stay with her family and to get better. When she returned to Port Arthur, Texas, she changed her lifestyle and cleaned herself up and stopped drinking and taking drugs. During that time period, she went to see a psychiatric social worker. She spoke about how she couldn't understand how she wanted to pursue a singing career and at the same time stay away from drugs and alcohol. Janice enrolled in college and started commuting to Austin to start singing in the bar scene there. And in 1966, again, that guy, Chet Helms, comes back into the picture. He was managing a band from San Francisco called Big Brother and the Holding Company. And at that time, he sent out one of his friends to go to Austin, Texas, and track down his friend, Janice Joplin. He wanted her to become the singer for his band. She auditioned and passed, I guess, with flying colors and joined Big Brother and the Holding Company. And they performed around the San Francisco Bay Area as well as up and down the California coastline and up into Washington State. Janice's first performance was at the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco. Her seminal moment with Big Brother and the Holding Company comes from her 1967 appearance in June at the Monterey Pop Festival. Now, interesting, her performance on Saturday at the festival was not allowed to be filmed, although there is audio tape from it. And the performance that people see on YouTube videos, which is quite excellent, is her performance of Ball and Chain. Now, if you notice, that was performed in the evening, but yet you're seeing shots of Mama Cass in the audience wearing sunglasses in the daytime. And what happened is the filmmaker, he was filming Mama Cass on Saturday during a daytime performance because he wasn't allowed to tape the band while they were performing. The filmmaker then used the Saturday afternoon audience reaction with the nighttime performance of Sunday. After this performance in August of 1967, the first album by the Big Brother and the Holding Company came out, and it later was re-released, added a few extra songs to the album, as well as the words featuring Janice Joplin. It was not until the band's second album, the 1968 classic album Cheap Thrills, that Janice really blew up and became an international star. This album went to #1 and stayed on the charts for 8 weeks. Also, the album garnered the hit single Piece of My Heart, which reached #12 on the pop charts. She left Big Brother and the Holding Company and formed the Cosmic Blues Band, which released an album. And then she left that band. She formed the band Full Tilt Boogie, and they released the Janis Joplin album Pearl. And this was Janis's final recording. In fact, her last song that she recorded on the album was Mercedes-Benz, which she wrote. And shortly after this, Janis was found dead on October 4th of 1970 due to a heroin overdose. Janis has a powerful mezzo-soprano voice, and she took other people's original songs and made them her own, and many times brought new life to quite ordinary songs. Janis did a lot of notable things in her lifetime. She is really the only female performer to reach the rock status that many male performers reached. She became a cultural icon. This was at a time when, to be successful as a woman, you not only had to sing, but you had to be pretty, and she broke the mold. People were saying that she didn't have a female act, but rather her act was for everyone. Janis is quoted as saying, and I love this quote, "On stage I made love to 25,000 people, and afterwards I went home alone." Janis sang against anything that stood in her way, and this is what gave us her electrifying performances. She is number 46 on the Greatest Artists of All Time on the Rolling Stone magazine. She is number 28 on the 100 Greatest Singers of All Time. She sold 18.5 million albums in her short lifetime, and she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame posthumously in 1995. Additionally, in 2005, she won the Grammy for Lifetime Achievement Award. Author Megan Terry stated that Janis was the female version of Elvis Presley, the way she can captivate an audience. Both Janis and Grace are two performers and two singers from the 60s that all women after them have to thank for opening up doors for them. Rosanne Cash actually wrote Rolling Stone's tribute, and in it she wrote several things that were interesting. First, she said that Janis had no fear at all. Also, that Janis held nothing back. But my favorite quote is that Rosanne Cash stated, "Janis sang from her toes and from her soul." Janis Joplin, my #1 greatest female rock singer of all time. Let me know how I did on my picks in the comments section below. If you have other females you thought I should include in the top 6, let me know as well. I have compiled a rather extensive honorable mention list. Hopefully your favorite singers in this list. As I said, there are a lot of great female rock singers. I did have to choose 6, but here goes. Here are the others that I feel could have made the list. Chrissie Hynde of The Pretenders, Deborah Harry of Blondie, Pat Benatar, Joan Jett, Lita Ford from the Runaways, Stevie Nicks, Hayley Williams from Paramore, Amy Lee from Evanescence, Lizzie Hale from Hailstorm, Floor Jansen from Nightwish. Now, for this person, I'd like to give a shout out to Tom Hardy. He turned me on to this singer, and I apologize for having overlooked her. Amy Winehouse, Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries, and finally Maggie Bell from a band called Stone the Crows. Again, a viewer turned me on to her. This band is a Scottish band from the late 1960s. There's a blues rock band. She has a tremendous voice. She's definitely worth checking out. The first unknown album is Desperado by the Eagles, which came out in 1973 on the Asylum record label. It was produced by Glyn Johns. This album is the second studio album by the Eagles. This is a country folk rock album. This album started out slow and only reached number 41 on the Billboard Hot 200 album list. It, however, did eventually sell over 2 million copies of the album, which makes it a double platinum album. At first, the band wanted to make this a concept album to talk about anti-heroes. They first wrote a song called Doolin Dalton, which talks about the Dalton gang of the West. However, after this song was written, they were unable to come up with any further ideas. Because of this, they switched gears and they made this album about mainly Western themes. This album began the collaborative writing of Don Henley and Glenn Frey. In fact, these two penned 8 out of the 11 tracks on this album. One interesting fact about this album, it's the only album cover where the band's picture actually appears. The second unknown album is Legend by Poco. This album came out in 1978. This is another country rock album, and this appeared on the ABC label. This album is actually the 11th studio album for Poco. For many people, this was their first exposure to the band Poco. When the album came out, it did not make a big splash. However, finally, the single that was released, Crazy Love, ended up reaching number 17 on the charts. And in fact, although this is the 11th studio album of Poco, this was the first song to crack the top 40. The album eventually rose to number 14 on the charts. Later on, they released a second single entitled Heart of the Night, and this one did reach also the top 20. The band formed in 1968 after the breakup of Buffalo Springfield. 2 members, Jimmy Messina as well as Richie Furay, formed Poco. The first studio album by Poco was Picking Up the Pieces. After the recording session, Randy Meisner left the band, and he obviously became part of the Eagles. He was replaced by Timothy Schmidt, who became one of their primary singers. And later on, as many of you know, he ended up also becoming a member of the Eagles. What most people don't realize is Poco is quite an important band. It was one of the original bands to set the stage for the Southern California country rock sound. And now for this video's unknown albums. The first unknown album. Great, hope you got that one. The second unknown album. Great, hope you got that one as well. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. And remember, keep them spinning.